We live in a reductive world where nothing is supposed to be complicated. We need to own that it's complicated. We need to own that we're not always going to agree, and we need to own that, we're all sitting on this rock in the middle of space, and there's twice as many people on the planet as there were when I was born, and we better figure it out. So, that's all advocacy, in my mind, reduces down to that, which is, it's not that easy.
Forces of Nature is a special collection of programs exploring issues affecting our natural world. Now through November, today's episode of Heart of the East End features one of the folks from right here on the East End working to preserve and repair the land and seas around us. Bob DeLuca of Group for the East End. Welcome back, Bob.
It's great to be here.
This week is about policy and making change with the group, which the group is no stranger to, especially in the arena of water quality. But before we talk water quality, we did recently have you and Jen Skilbred on to talk about the triennial count of the Osprey. So I'm curious about what changes led to the rebound of the numbers of our region's favorite bird of prey.
So going all the way back, I think we've talked about this a little bit. So in the 1970s or whatever, the presence of persistent pesticides, which made its way through the food chain into the ospreys and into the ospreys' eggs, and there was a great deal of failure in those eggs, and essentially the population on Long Island dropped down probably below 100 birds at some point. Mm-hmm. Once that pesticide was banned, because people realized the impacts it was having, and not just on ospreys, but eagles and other species, the birds began to recover, and there was a major effort, not just the group, but lots of organizations going back 30 or 40 years to start building these platforms that people see them around, that the osprey nest on. And that's not always where they would have preferred to nest in nature, because they didn't exist, but they were constructed in a way which kept nest predators out. If you notice, if you look at them, sometimes they have like a little piece of sheathing, like a sheet steel sheathing, which, if you're a raccoon, slips, can't get up there. And so those really helped, right? So they got put in. The birds started coming back. They did very well on their own. As the fisheries have improved, particularly with menhaden through the years, that also, which is a major food source for the osprey throughout its journey, and also during the breeding season, all that contributed, I think, as did, I would say in general, efforts for water quality in general, which make water more clear, less turbid, have more oxygen, hold more fish. That also helps the osprey. And, this year we did see a fall off in the numbers from last year. The population is still robust, but the average number of chicks fledged this year was just about one chick per nest. We have had in prior years as high as like 1.3 chicks per nest.
But let's talk about the numbers. You were saying how it used to be like less than 100 birds. About how many were you counting this year?
So now you're in the thousands of birds. I mean, we have over, 100 nests just in Southold Town easily, and obviously throughout the entire East End there are lots and lots of, and we look at somewhere between 550, maybe 600 nests that we keep track of.
Right.
Now that's by no means all of the nests,
right? But
it's the ones that we track over time, and
but that's still quite a change.
It's a tremendous change,
positive direction.
And it's nice, I know we've had this conversation. It's nice to have a story sometimes where there's like a positive outcome,
right?
And people did something to help.
Yes.
And those two things in the environmental field, right there, sometimes they appear hard to come by.
Yes.
But it does happen.
Oh, okay. So speaking of which, let's talk about a big thing that happened for water quality. In 2024, just last year, voters approved $6 billion to protect clean water and revitalize Long Island's coast. Let's talk about what it took to get there. I know just the year before, Newsday reported that of the 48 water districts across Long Island, 33 of those water districts had traces of PFAS in their drinking water, forever chemicals.
Right. And so that Water Quality Restoration Fund that was approved by the Suffolk County electorate, and by the way, the numbers were over 70%, and it's very difficult, as you know, to find people agreeing 70% of anything. But they all thought water quality was that important that they should make this long-term investment. And that was about 15 years in the making. And it also coincides with an understanding that the surface water quality in our bays and harbors is more and more seen as being related to the way that we've been managing our septic waste through the years.
Right.
And I used to work at the county health department, and back in the day,
I didn't know this.
and back in the day,
When was that you worked at the health department?
in the Pleistocene. No, it was back in the mid 1980s to the early 1990s. And then the health department was really working on things like leaking underground gasoline tanks, and also trying to make sure that there was not bacterial contamination in people's drinking water from septic systems that were being installed. And improvements were made from the early days of just having a cesspool where everything that goes down the drain goes into one sort of hopper, to having a tank and pool system and getting those tanks to be cleaned. So it was a gradual improvement in what we had. Bottom line was, the idea was really to keep drinking water safe, and there wasn't as much understanding about the sensitivity of surface waters to the presence of nitrogen. So you and I might be able to intake a certain amount of nitrogen in our bodies, and we would be perfectly fine with that. The marine ecosystem turns out to be much more sensitive. Mm-hmm. And so through a lot of work that's been done, some of it pioneered right here on the East End with Dr. Chris Gobler and Stony Brook University, looking at tracking where this nitrogen was coming from and what it was doing to our bays and harbors.
We look at the Gobler Lab water quality report every year.
Right. And so what Chris and his team was able to do was really show over time, and they looked at many, many water bodies, that there were a lot of things happening. So we have groundwater contamination from things like forever chemicals. We still have residual contamination.
Runoff, right.
We have contamination from other old industrial sites and things like that. And the problems on Long Island are somewhat different depending on where you are. So if you're in a more urbanized part of Suffolk County, let's say, you may have one type of problem. Out here on the East End, we have other types of problems. But the bottom line was, water quality is a problem, and we need to do better. So this fund, essentially approved by the voters, creates a long-term investment strategy primarily focused on cleaning up septic waste. So there are certain areas, mostly in Western Suffolk, where you have communities that are between two sewer districts, but they're not connected up to a sewer. They're still using cesspools, let's say. You have people whose homes are still on cesspools, even though they're in a district. And this funding is to try to connect all of those pieces together, and so that you have a more comprehensive, strategic septic waste management plan for Suffolk County, particularly in areas that have sewage treatment plants to treat that sewage. Out here, it's different. So we've got some 350,000 septic systems in Suffolk County, separate systems like you would have at your home, and all different types in all different places. Out here, some of them were put in probably by hand, 60 years ago, and now people are living in the houses full time. And so there's a lot of different things that have happened through the years. The idea is to help homeowners pay for the cost of getting a system that specifically reduces nitrogen in the outflow. So it's it's a treatment system.
Yeah.
That treatment system goes in place of whatever you have now. And the theory here is that nobody did anything wrong. This is what we knew at the time. So how do we incentivize people to do it? And how do we help pay for that? And so the county money also has a state match. And I think it's $15,000 now from the county and $15,000 from the state. And some of the towns, Southampton and East Hampton, and I think Shelter Island to a smaller extent, they have some other funds through their CPF, the Community Preservation Fund,
right,
that people can access.
Because that can go towards water quality,
right, which
projects,
also
is fabulous.
Approved by the voters, very high numbers, that 20% of your community preservation funds can be put toward water quality projects.
That's huge.
And collectively, over time, this is about a 30-year program, you're looking at a combined investment through this. And last year, we also extended the existing drinking water protection program, gets you in the neighborhood of about $6 billion for clean water investment and open space and land protection investment, which comes in under what's called the 477 program, which is the Water Quality Protection Plan.
What have we seen since the fund was established last year thus far?
So
to date,
as all things government, the first thing is you have to get an implementation plan now that you have this money, which is going to be coming in. So in the last couple of months, myself, Adrian Esposito from Citizens Campaign for the Environment, other environmental people, alongside the 20 or so members of the Suffolk County Water Quality Restoration Trustees who were appointed from various local governments, and Nature Conservancy is on there and so forth, are trying to put together, how do you make what does this look like in practice? Right. And so there's been an effort to create an implementation plan. The final draft of that plan was approved in the summer. And essentially it lays out what the cornerstone programs are going to be. So there are a couple of things that have been added in, which we support. One is to help provide people with maintenance funding over time to make sure that the systems are properly maintained. Right. Until eventually probably you're going to have enough systems in the ground to do a district, which would be much more cost effective. There is going to be Again, the programs are clearly outlined there in terms of what the funding sources are. Now, that also has to pass through the legislature. So that package will go over to the legislature. There's a package that'll come back up for public hearing, which we will be at, and we will move that forward. And so there will be a structure and a framework to manage this program. And, I know it's annoying. It's annoying to everybody. But the reality is
right.
You don't want to have that much money floating around and not know where it's going.
Right.
And everybody agrees. And I think...
so that must be great. I mean, what is it? Is it looking like this stuff is going to pass and people are generally in agreement about what ought to happen?
I would have to think that and this is one of the reasons why we always want to go to the electorate. So when 72% of the people in Suffolk County say they want to do anything, if you're an elected official of any stripe, you're like, you know what? I'm on that.
Right, I'm on that team.
And I think that's great. And I think we will see, the current county executive, who's a Republican, supports where the former county executive was, who was a Democrat, that we should do this. There's support on the legislature among most members. I think that overall we'll get there. I live in that process, so it's not as painful for me maybe as it is for others, but we'll get there. And I think that we'll be able to, to flick the switch on the program. Once that happens, probably by next year, this program will be up and running. And by the way, simultaneous to that, the county is also working to make this project more consumer friendly, right? So people who
Meaning what? Yeah.
So there was a rebate program
right. Okay. All right. So from my point of view, right? The rebate program, I remember initially there was something that I think scared a lot of people, right? Which is that they were making, you had to claim these things on your taxes. That got worked out initially. But I think also town to town, it's different. And where do you go and who do you talk to? And what is the whole thing going to cost the homeowner from soup to nuts, that type of thing?
Yes. And one of the reasons we and others wanted to see this as a comprehensive, voter-approved, well-funded, sustaining program was that's when you get to something which looks the same today as it does 6 months from now, right?
Right.
And you have to remember,
and in different towns, wherever you are.
Even though there was a grant program that the county has been running with support from the state of New York, it still was like, well, what if we don't do this? What if it doesn't pass? And so you can't really staff up a program in the way that you need to, unless you know it's going to be there for some period of time.
Got it.
So this concept, and former Deputy County Exec Peter Scully used to say, a stable and recurring revenue source. Like those words are the Bible of a program that's likely to work over time. It's got to be stable, you got to know what it is, and it's got to exist over time, right? It's got to be recurring. So with that in place, one of the other issues is you can now, with some of that money, bring people that you need without having to find more money for them, because the fund will help a portion of it, up to I think it's 10%, can be used to get the program to work. So you need more people. You need better computer systems. You need something which is more readily accessible to the public so they can get in there and, rather than running around with a bunch of, pieces of survey paper and getting a signature here and hand delivering it there. They're working now to try to get that to be easier on the person who's going to do it. We obviously know that has to happen, because even if somebody's offering to provide financial support, the average person just doesn't have all kinds of time to make this work. And this is a voluntary program in many cases, right? So you're just basically hoping.
They need a website. They need like a place that they can go and an application that they can fill out, and then, someone to trigger whatever change needs to happen.
And I will say that they are now, they are doing presentations. The health department's doing presentations. We're trying to work, and not just us, but other community organizations are working with the county to bring this out. So a civic group, for example, can have their folks come and say, okay, how does this work, and who do I see, and what's the name of the person I need to talk to? It's a big program and it's a new program, so you got to give it a little grace. But I think it's going to start working the way it's supposed to work within, by the time we get to this time next year, I hope I can sit with you and say, yeah, listen, this many grants have gone out the door, and this is the systems that are in the ground. Because to go after, let's say, the top 200,000 systems, you got to have a very aggressive program, right? Or in my lifetime, I'm not going to see this happen. So, we're all very hopeful.
So you're looking at changing some of school districts, et cetera. Talk to me about what you mean by the top systems, et cetera.
So essentially, the goal here is to get the best systems in the ground that we can for the areas that have the greatest need, right? So part of that is.
But I'm wondering if scale is mattering here, because I imagine that larger septic systems make more of an impact on the water quality than.
Oddly, you'd be surprised. So let's say, for example, a school system.
Yeah.
Right, which has a very specific type of waste, right? It doesn't have like a lot of commercial kitchen waste. It doesn't, and all summer there's nobody there.
Right.
So, and let's say it's 10 miles away from the coastline. So a system, while by volume, by size, right, it may have more capacity, and it also is that the capacity may be 20%. So where you really have the most significant issues aggregating over time,
or like directly by the bodies
within
of
like
water.
let's say the 5-year travel time because we know the travel time that it takes for water to get from it leaving your house to getting into the surface waters. So sometimes it's less than a year, sometimes it's 2 years, but that sort of let's say 5-year horizon. You start
so
looking
then
there.
weather is also factoring into all this.
Geography, if you're at a foot above sea level, that water is going sideways into the surface waters. If you're at a much higher elevation, that water is going much deeper, and it has more time to dilute and attenuate, so the nitrogen may be less significant than you think, depending on where you're physically located, because that's how long it takes that water to reach a surface water. So what all these guys in the health department have done, and again, it's not it's not great bedtime reading, but if you go and take a look at this report, when they basically modeled over 140, I think, specific watersheds, and are looking at the nitrogen inputs and figuring out how many people around there and how many different situations have how many different types of septic systems and what has to happen to get the water quality in better shape in those areas. That's what took them the better part of a decade to do, and God bless them, because you now have something where you can say, we know what this watershed needs, we know what we're trying to do to get there, and because the health department's records are reasonably good, they're not perfect. You can look at old health department records and see, okay, what kind of septic system does that house have? What year did it go in? Because depending on what year it went in, if it went in before like 1972, it's going to have a cesspool. It may have a tank and pool after that. So there's all that data has actually been useful and will be useful in terms of prioritizing.
People totally sleep on their health departments. And I know I've looked at maps that my father himself has done just like this in New Jersey, in Bergen County. And I'm wondering about your years at the health department and how that has informed or helped you to be more effective for the group, because it makes me think of like my favorite PR people to work with are journalists who are former journalists who know what I'm going to be needing, etc. How has working with the health services here in Suffolk County, how has that helped in this whole process?
I think in a lot of ways, like all things, there are still people there, just like I'm still here, that were there when I was there. So you develop relationships, in your 20s, and now I'm, older than that. And, some of those folks are still, so those personal relationships that you developed at that time just allow you to know somebody, to understand like how things work there, what they have to get through in a given day.
Right.
So I'm not just like banging on the glass saying, you guys have to do better. I can also go to the legislature and speak to the issues of budget, speak to the issues of positions. If you lost 4 or 5 positions and they've been frozen for 10 years, well, I'm not surprised but how does the average person doesn't have that knowledge.
Right.
So the goal is to try to maintain those relationships, understand what those agencies need. The vast majority of people in agencies, much as people may frown at people at motor vehicle or whatever, it's not easy work. People are trying to do their best job, and it is complicated. Like this stuff is not, it is engineering, and it's not just like, hey, throw a hole in the ground and, you want it to work. Right. And so the angles have to be right. The flow has to be right. The inspections have to take place. You want to know that the pipe is connected. I mean, it's a true story. My house, when I bought my house in East Marion, they were connecting. It was a house that was like half built and it fell through, and I managed to get in there and I bought it from the builder. But the guys who put in the septic system didn't connect it to the house, and they were like ready to go. And I happened to go to the property, and I was working for the county health department, I think, at the time. And it wasn't connecting to the house, and it was like these guys put in this part, those guys put in that part, and the 2 pipes didn't connect, so they had to get somebody out there.
And most people would have no idea.
And maybe they would have caught it, but who knows, right? So I just think things like it's sometimes a little more complicated than you think. And obviously, we want government to work effectively and efficiently and use your money wisely. But you'd be surprised, particularly like I think the Suffolk County Health Department through the generations, long before my time, was known for being one of the most effective and proficient health departments probably in the country, because the very first work that was done on pioneering groundwater protection, what we call bulk storage tanks, which means your gas station that may have a 10,000 gallon tank. Can't just be single-walled steel.
Right.
Was well ahead of the curve. So those types of actions, even what's known as Article 6, which basically tells you how big your lot can be for health department purposes, often was more restrictive than the local zoning, which some people groused about. But the reality was we didn't want people drinking contaminated water if they had a private well. And now it turns out, thank God, right? Because that was
because even so,
still better than we had. Right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on over there. There's a lot of younger guys now, good engineers, the guys that did the sub-watersheds plan. A lot of respect for that work. And again, now they have to go into the legislature and explain it to people who've got a zillion other things that they're thinking about, and they have to try to make this, make sense, and also try to have the public understand it. So I to answer your initial question, I just think the relationships that you build throughout your entire career, if you sustain them, and it has something to do with what you're doing now, really helpful. And
I'm curious, most immediately, because I'm thinking we've got the North Fork pipeline happening now. Are any of these issues at play? Because I think they were saying, we shouldn't have a hearing about what?
Yeah, and that's another interesting.
Because I'm curious about that project.
I know some of those guys too, because they came out of different places in the county. So I don't agree that this Monroe balancing test should take place for this project, whether I like the project or don't.
What
like
is the Monroe balancing test? Tell me what's at issue and what's going on.
The short story is that we have an environmental review process in New York State that is largely intended to have all parties and give all parties an opportunity to have something to say about it. And agencies which have a permit to give are given, let's say, a more direct role in the outcome than, let's say, you just have an opinion about the project, right? So as a member of the public, the law provides for me to have a voice,
right,
public
to
hearing,
say
public
what you want to say.
But if I was an involved agency, like when I worked at the health department, we had a permit to give on a particular project, and that permit can't be given until this process is done, essentially, to our satisfaction, if you will.
Okay.
So the theory is that you get all the agencies around the table at the beginning of the process, so that at the end of the process, you don't have a project developer going, the town said it was fine, and now the health department doesn't like it, but DEC would say it would be okay.
Got it. Okay.
So that's the theory.
Right.
In practice, it's a little more vague, but the bottom line here is this Monroe balancing test, as I understand it, and I've looked into this a little bit. If you're a town and the permits that you're talking about are all town permits for a project that is sort of deemed to be of, great public importance. So maybe you say, all right, look, we're just going to kind of make one decision about this, and the other permit, the other involved agencies are not going to be as directly involved in it as they might be, because it's going to take more time. And we're going to kind of make the call on the environmental review.
Is that what they're saying when they're saying we don't need to have a hearing or
so
whatnot?
Their position would be, listen, it's a pipeline. We do pipelines. We provide public water. That's not something like the town, the various towns may have their own interests, but really the provision of public water is something that we...
That's what the water authority
That's what we're there for.
Saying.
And they do have special authorities because of the way that they're structured under New York state law. Mm-hmm. I would argue that, if you do anything, get everybody involved whenever you can, because first of all, a road opening permit or something like that from a local municipality is probably not going to make or break the project. But what will happen is that the public, and it's happening right now,
right,
the public's perception of this project, which is a big capital investment in a large project coming into an area that didn't have a big public water pipe before,
right,
makes people nervous for all kinds of reasons. If you start saying, well, we're going to, even if it's, technically exclude somebody, just that'd be a little less.
By saying, we don't need to hear from you,
yeah.
I think that automatically makes people wonder.
So I've made this point in testimony to the Water Authority. We've made it in written testimony and oral testimony, as have many others. But I've also at the same time not, said, look, don't burn the buildings down. Like, let's see what this project is, but let's get everybody.
In theory, this is an important thing that is a good thing.
There's a legitimate issue that they're trying to address. In other words, you can love or hate the Water Authority, but rarely do they say, let's just burn money and take a pipeline from Flanders and move it.
Right.
They have a legitimate need, and part of the need is what we do in the way that we use public water. So they will tell you, and I believe this to be true, that something like as much as 70% of the water that's being used up in the summertime, when we don't have a lot of water coming in naturally, is to irrigate our lawns. Mm. And so, you can understand from their side, it's like, listen, you guys don't want a pipeline, but could you everybody doesn't have to have.
And we're having issues with people using too much, et
Yes,
cetera.
and in
we're
Southold,
getting an emergency. And then there's also a lot of wells up there that I imagine are, as years go by, switching over
Yes.
to public water.
Yes, and some of those wells,
which is a good thing.
And and also some of the public wells are not doing so well because of the drawdown on the system over time. Southold is in rougher shape than other places. Like there's more land mass here on the south side than there is up there, and that amount of land mass has a lot to do with the amount of fresh water that you can pile up underneath where you are. Right, so Southold has sort of three distinct chunks of good water. One in Orient, kind of one a little further to the west, like let's say Greenport, that area. And then you've got like in Mattituck and Laurel in that area, right? But it's not like it's lean, and there's a lot of consumption. And I recognize people like Glynis Berry, who's an architect and also works in a lot of water issues. Who lives in Orient. She raised this issue with the town many years ago. It's out there, and one of the challenges is well, whose job is it? The Water Authority will tell you, and they are not wrong, that if all this development is allowed to go on and everything is happening in the town, our job is to provide public water, and that's what we do.
Right.
Concerns in the town are when you bring public water, people come to us and they say, well, now that I have public water, I should be able to do more. And that's not our fault. That's you guys. So what I really wanted to say on this whole program today, and this brings me to it, is
good, because we're getting close.
The world's a complicated place.
Yes.
And we live in a reductive world where nothing is supposed to be complicated, which causes us to choose sides.
That's what we think.
Right.
We think like, it's so simple, etc.
And we're bombarded with information, which makes us all crazy.
And misinformation.
And we're trying to make complex decisions in complex systems in real time. And
with people from all different points of view, etc.
And I'm still a firm believer after all these years that as messy as it can be to get everybody around the table and have the initial argument, that's still much better than pushing it out till the end and making it a battle royale in the last 10 minutes, right? So no one is well served by that, I don't think, at least in my experience. We need to own that it's complicated. We need to own that we're not always going to agree, and we need to own that we're all sitting on this rock in the middle of space, and there's twice as many people on the planet as there were when I was born, and we better figure it out. So, that's all advocacy, in my mind, reduces down to that, which is it's not that easy, and we should be okay. And
we got to ask the questions.
Because
otherwise, we all know what putting our head in the sand really does.
And
or in the surface
and I'll
waters,
say that the decade of work that the county did to develop this watershed plan, the most comprehensive plan anywhere, I think in the state of New York, I would venture, science-based, right? Probably the best investment of that 10 years. Even though I would have loved to have had this program 10 years ago and said, look, we all know water is in trouble and we just got to do something about it, so let's do it next week. Yeah, that's great for the first 10 minutes, but then this is what you need. And I just wish, I pray that people understand the challenges that we face and their complexity before we start pointing the finger at everybody who we think didn't do something.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for following the science and continuing to advocate for us here on the East End with the group. Folks interested to learn more about the group for the East End can find them at thegroup.org.
Yep.
And for more from WNET's Forces of Nature Tentpole Initiative, you can sign up for our e-newsletter at wliw.org/Forces of Nature. I'm Gianna Volpe. That was Bob DeLuca. This is Grover Anderson, and you, whoever you are out there, you are awesome, and you're listening to WLIW FM.